Greetings, I'm Justin Rothshank, and I'm here to invite you to join me and 30 other potters from around the country for the 10th annual Michiana Pottery Tour, happening on September 25 and 26 in northern Indiana and southern Michigan. You'll find a list of participating potters, links to their web stores, and more information at www.michianapotterytour.com or on our Instagram page at Michiana Pottery Tour. We hope to see you at the 10th annual Michiana Pottery Tour.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 390 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I am featuring a conversation with Kathy King, Rose Katz, and Matt Katz about their new podcast, For Flux Sake. This podcast takes a lighthearted look at the science behind clay and glaze, and this is an opportunity for you to have the gang answer your questions that you might be struggling with about the chemistry behind your ceramics. If you'd like to submit a question for the show, you can do so by sending an audio memo to forfluxsakepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to find out more about the show, you can do that at brickyardnetwork.org/forfluxsake. Before we get to that episode, I wanted to thank the folks that have been donating to our show. I'd like to thank Liz Fox for her contributions and for all of the other folks that make this podcast run. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do so at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves because there's many of you. So I'm going to start with you, Kathy. Can you talk about where you are and what your job is?
My name is Kathy King, and I am here in Allston, Massachusetts, right across the river from Harvard. And I am currently the director of the Harvard Ceramics Program through the Office of the Arts at Harvard. I'm also a studio artist, and when I try to be a studio artist in my spare time, and I'm just thrilled to be here.
You win the award for the longest title. Like every time I hear your job description, it's like at the office of the thing of the thing. I know.
I'm supposed to say, and I'm the director of the ceramics program through the Office of the Arts at Harvard. No one wants to answer the phone here. I mean, It takes too long. The person's hung up. But when they gave us the bill, and they put a sign outside that said Harvard Ceramics, so we're going with it.
Nice.
I'm Rose Katz, and I'm one of the co-founders of Ceramic Materials Workshop, and I am an online educator and ceramic science researcher.
And I am Matt Katz, and I am the other co-founder of Ceramic Materials Workshop, along with Rose. And I have a history of being a ceramic materials educator and researcher at schools like the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University, the Rhode Island School of Design, and I teach for Kathy at Harvard Ceramics, as well as many other schools, as well as Ceramic Materials Workshop.
Nice. And we've come together to promote For Flux Sake, which is your guys' new podcast. And one of the wonderful things about this podcast is that it allows listeners to send in questions and actually have their glaze questions answered. But one of the first questions I have for you guys is, how do you deal with attribution error, which is where a student comes to you and says, I really need your help with topic A. But you know from your experience that actually topic A is not what's causing their problem. It's topic B or C, but they don't know that yet. And students often are asking the wrong question. So when someone comes to you for glaze advice, how do you figure out like what is the core of their question?
Well, I usually tell them to take a seat, and it's going to be a long discussion.
Rose is right. One of the hardest things in ceramics, there aren't easy answers. You know, we all sort of, you see the quick article or the post online and, oh, here's the easiest way to fix your crazing problem. And the reality is, it is not an easy answer. This is complex chemistry, and we have to be prepared to address the problems as is, and it's not going to be a simple solution. So the most important thing is to listen and to get as much detail as possible, and then, to think through how everything works together.
And from my perspective in working in a community studio, it's interesting because when you have so many artists working together and everyone has their own theory, sometimes people can become so confused and, need to have one source to be able to trust. And so that's why we have Matt working with us here.
So that's why you kick that can right down the road to
That's
Matt's
right.
house.
Oh, no kidding. I mean, I remember when I was teaching at Georgia State University, I taught a glaze chemistry class, and I spent every weekend just cramming to teach that 2-hour class. So I understand how much work it takes, and these two, Rose and Matt, are brilliant. So better them than me.
Oh, thank you.
That is actually why we exist, because Rose and I both came out of Alfred University, and it's this amazing school with all of this information and all of these inspiring teachers, but nobody's focusing on the technical side of things. There's some techs that do a couple of things here and there, but the main professor core, they're teaching pottery and they're teaching sculpture, and although they have a lot of experience, that experience is not always congruous with knowledge. And unfortunately, it leads to myth and rumor and questions and sort of just that vague haze of information that exists in the ceramics world. And Rose and I, years ago, we started with studio practice. We were both potters and sculptors. And we sort of took a step back because we had an opportunity to look at materials purely from a material standpoint. And that to us was really powerful because we can detach ourselves from what we think we know and spend all of our time figuring out what the reality is.
Yeah, and you mentioned that students often want the easy answer. And with chemistry, there's so many variables that can shift. And one of those is materials. Like when our ceramic materials change, how does that affect our chemistry? And I can't remember which episode it was that you guys addressed that, but that happens. Like in all of our ceramic careers, we've gone from Colemanite to Gersley borate to Gillespie borate, back to Gersley borate, back to, I guess we're still at Gersley borate, maybe.
Who knows now? I don't know.
It's constantly changing. I just had one of our longtime students write me an email that says their particular supplier just said that Gersley's going away. It's not. It happens that supplier doesn't have a contract to sell Gersley borate. And so they're sort of switching lines, and who knows whatever person on the other end of the phone line is telling you and what they know and all that kind of stuff. But it's this game of telephone that ends up happening in the materials world that, it's difficult.
Who are these cruel puppet masters who are overseeing Gersley borate?
They're just playing with all of our emotions.
I know.
If you want the Gersley borate story, the truth is that it's still out there, but it's not being mined anymore, and it hasn't been mined for a long time. But Laguna, the ceramic supply company out of the Los Angeles area, they have the stockpile. They own all of it, and they're sort of doling it out over the next however many years. I was over there a few years ago, and they said they had, I believe at the time they were saying that they had a 20-year supply. I was a little bit skeptical that it was that long, but I saw the stockpile. I literally walked through the warehouse, and they showed me the big pile. And yeah, there's a bunch there, and they'll just continue to sell it until it's gone.
Wow. A 20-year supply. The storage of all this material is another thing that you guys actually address on one of the episodes, which is, you can go out and you can buy a 50-pound bag of materials, or you can try to get a small amount that you can keep, in your miniature glaze cabinet so that you don't have to have a gigantic warehouse to make your first glazes. So if a student or a potter is wanting to set up their sort of first testing regimen to find, let's say, a cone 6 glaze, can you guys talk about how you practically would do that?
Well, I mean, if you're setting up your studio, I mean, you've probably dealt with commercial glazes, which are little like pints or quarts, and you could stick with those small amounts. You can buy small amounts. You don't have to go out and buy 50 pounds of material and have all these materials stockpiled, because some of them you may only use a small percentage in your, you might mix up at the most a 5-gallon bucket that is going to last you a while if you're one person in a studio. If you're in a community studio, you probably go through it a little more, but there's no need to like stockpile a ton of material and make sure you have all this stuff for years and years and years. It's just not practical sometimes. So, you could have small amounts and mix up small amounts of glazes and start out simple first. Don't go out and buy all the crazy materials and expensive ones at first. Do your testing, and, figure out what works for you in your studio. And if it's small amounts, then do small amounts.
It's super easy to get overwhelmed when you go to the ceramic supply store. There's, first of all, you get probably a piece of paper that says, well, we have this in stock, and, what's this and what's that. And that getting comfortable with those things is an important detail. And as Rose says, you can go out and buy, 500 grams or, like a pound of material. Most of them will sell you that. You're going to end up with a lot of different bags of material, but, just keep everything organized and labeled, and it'll be okay. But from a basic, let's say you want a basic cone 6 glaze. Look, you're going to need essentially 5 basic materials. Okay. You're going to want a feldspar. Now, there's a lot of feldspars out there, and go over the whole list of the names, but you're going to need a feldspar, but something like a nepheline cyanite, which technically is a feldspathoid, but it's essentially a feldspar, but a nepheline cyanite. You're going to want an alkaline earth source. Calcium's the easiest one. Whiting, also known as calcium carbonate, is generally what you're going to want for that. You're going to want, at cone 6, you're generally going to need a source of a material called boron. And boron comes from Gerstley borate. Gerstley borate's one of the most common naturally occurring ones. That's if you're in the States. If you're international, you'd look for a material called colemanite, or ulixite is sort of an equivalent. Or you're going to look for a material called a frit. Frits are manufactured glaze ingredients. That might seem weird, but sometimes we need to get a material with a perfect chemistry for what we're doing, and frits work for that. In the States, again, frit 3134, most ceramic supply stores will carry. Then you're going to want a silica source, silica, quartz, or flint. You'll hear all those terms. They're all the same thing as far as the ceramic supply store is concerned. It's a very fine quartz powder. It's like baking flour. And then the last one is you're going to need what's known technically as a kaolin. Again, in the States, the most common kaolin is EPK. That just stands for Edgar's Plastic Kaolin. It's a kaolin out of Florida. And kaolins we use in our glazes. They're also what make clay bodies clay. The material that sticks together is generally kaolin. But if you're international, a china clay, or what in the States we call graulig, or just something that's called kaolin. But if you get those, you can make a glossy glaze, you can make a matte glaze, you can make a huge variety of glazes. You might want a few colorants, because those 5 ingredients will just be clear. So, some cobalt or some copper, that's where you can experiment and try a couple of things. But if you can get those 5 ingredients, get 500 grams, 1,000 grams, you definitely can start making your own glazes and make a huge variety of glazes from those. Now, it's easy to get overwhelmed and go opening books and opening the website glazy.org and saying like, oh my gosh, I don't have this ingredient, I don't have that ingredient. And then you feel like, oh, well, I can't make this. But that's actually part of what we're trying to show, is how to learn about your materials so that you can make them. The interesting thing about our glazes is that they're really based on the chemistry and not the materials. We can make most glazes work using different materials. The materials aren't that special as long as we're getting in the chemistries that we need. And that's really where the ability to sort of dance with your glazes comes in.
I like to dance with my glazes.
I know, right? Why'd you wait till now to come up with that? That's T-shirts. Happening.
There you go, Ben. We'll find a T-shirt for it.
Well, what just happened is a very good example of the show. I ask you guys a question, and then we laugh a lot, and then Matt explains it, and then we laugh some more. And that's the show, essentially.
At me?
Yeah, so the end is just laughing at Matt in every...
That sounds about right.
But this brings up your guys' friendship, because one of the premises of the show is that you're talking about something serious, but it is not a serious show. Like, it is on the Brickyard Network. It is the closest thing to a comedy show, because Kathy's usually making fun of you guys while you guys are saying serious things.
Rightfully so.
So could you guys talk about your friendship?
Oh,
well,
my.
It goes back way too far, and that just brings back the age of things. But I first met Kathy because I was starstruck. Because even back when we were all younglings, that Kathy was a rock star in my eyes. And she sort of, she came, we knew people that knew people. And I was like, hi, Miss Kate, you're amazing. Can I tell you how amazing you are? And then I just like hide in the corner and,
Get out of here, kid. You're bothering me.
So cool.
Wow. Checks in the mail, Matt. Checks in the mail.
No, it's true. You are doing things that people could only dream of. And I'm always coming into ceramics as a fan. I met Rose because I was a fan. I was literally walking through the studios at Alfred University, and I see a pottery class going on, and I see this amazing pot on a shelf. And I turn to one of the faculty members, John Gill, who is teaching the class. And I just me being me, I jump in and I interrupt. And he's having a lecture. And I say, John Gill, who made that pot? And he says, Rose Beeling made that pot. And he points at Rose, and she just turns bright red.
Bright red.
That's so sweet.
And that was it. And then 20 years later, here we are.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so old, I can't remember how I met you two. I know. I really don't. But I mean, I just know that following your careers and over the years, and then, just being in a situation where I could see in a community center that we needed glaze education. And again, I was joking before, but I was serious that I wasn't going to be the one to do it. So who should do it? And in an urban studio like ours, I mean, exactly that same thing. People are nervous about setting up, a studio or glaze materials in a small apartment, So we wanted to really provide that service of people. If they took the class with Matt, then they would get access to our materials lab. And we knew that they were going to do it safely. We have a staff member here, Casey Zhang, who works with Matt and is kind of the person on the ground to make sure that everyone is able to be here and doing their classwork, So it's been a really great model. And I think other studios should really think about taking that on.
And it allows you guys to reach so many people. Like, I love that about the online education scenario. I mean, I know from talking to you guys, like, your classes are full, and they're also from people from everywhere. So you have a lot of European students. You have, people from all across the U.S. And that's I love that about online education, is it has the potential to spread widely quickly. And the podcast does as well.
I'm amazed at all the students from all over, and like juggling time zones not easy, but like we talk to people all over the world, and Matt, almost every day is talking to people in Australia, people in South Africa, people in Canada and California. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
What's been fascinating over, the years we've been doing online education is the universality of the materials. And what's so cool about this conversation is, we have a ton of students in Australia. And like, I've never used Echolite kaolins, but I can tell you all about how to use them in our glazes. And our students' glazes do exactly what we think they should, because chemistry and heat, they're all the same the world around. So as long as we know what your materials are, it doesn't matter where you are. The only challenge is language, but time, communication, materials, ceramics, all of that is universal. And it's so amazing that we can all function together in this tiny little community that suddenly becomes huge.
I put some inspirational music behind what he was just saying. So. Well, I think this is a good place to play the clip where we're going to play some listener submitted questions in which you guys answer. But I want to make sure people understand that they can follow the podcast it's called For Flux Sake, and it's on all the major podcast apps, and it comes out every other Wednesday forever.
Forever.
You guys
Awesome.
signed that contract
Ever
in blood.
and ever and ever. But we need your questions to keep it going. So
Yes.
listen and send questions.
Good time to plug that. And remind me what the email is for them to submit questions.
For Flux Sake Podcast at gmail.com.
And we'd like audio memos. So that's the one thing, is send in a little audio memo of a recording of you asking your question. You can do it on pretty much every smartphone and just email that off.
And I also wanted to remember to plug, there's sometimes extra information that comes up on the blog, which is Ceramic Materials Workshop /blog.
.com/blog.
.com/blog. Well, thank you guys for your time. It's good to see you, and the show is amazing.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for all your hard work and the Brickyard. It's going to be great.
So let's get into our first question.
Hi, for Flux Sake. This is Jessica from Los Angeles, and I have a question. What does food safe even mean? Does it mean that the chemicals from the glaze go into the food? Or does it mean that the food goes into the glaze? I'm so confused.
Well, that's a good one. I certainly don't want to die from my pottery.
No, nobody does.
This is my art, and it is dangerous.
It can be both. You can have glaze release into your food, but you can also have food get into your glaze.
Yeah, well, we have a problem that's generally called leaching. And that is when your food is breaking down your glaze and the materials that are in the fired glazes enter your food. And so what happens is then you eat the food and those materials can theoretically go into your body. The real question with release, though, is what is being released and what is a threat. And that is the greater part of Jessica's question, because in the ceramics community, we have a lot of things that we are afraid of.
Well, there's materials that the public, the general public, know that we might use, but a lot of us don't use them.
Right. The most important one is, of course, lead. You will hear people ask about lead all the time. If you make pottery and you say you go to a craft show, people are going to ask you some point during that day is there lead in this? Because the public has been told to be afraid of lead in pottery. But the reality is most modern art ceramics, handmade ceramics, don't use lead. It's very, very rare in the modern context. It's not that it's not in the world, it is, but it's not in what most people make in everyday work.
So let's say, for example, that someone I know used a coffee cup this morning that they love. They use it almost every day. It's kind of obsessive, but looking down on it, you can see brown coffee stains within the crazing of the glaze. Is that dangerous for my friend?
just for a friend.
Yes.
I'm asking for a friend.
All right, friend. Wink. For those who don't know, what's crazing, Rose?
Crazing is the fine cracks you see on your the surface of your pot through your glaze. So that's a crack that goes down to the body of the clay. So it's basically like a fissure developing in your glaze.
One of the funnier things about Craze is that Rose and we were shopping for tile recently. And of course, when you go and look at tile, you'll see tiles that are crazed. But in the tile industry, they call it crackle because it's a decorative effect. But in pottery, we call it crazing.
And it's not what we want.
No, I was raised as a pottery baby to like never allow crazing to be on any glaze. So that's why I was concerned about my friend's mug.
Well, so for your friend, there was a study that was published in Ceramics Monthly not too long ago where they actually looked at bacterial contamination in crazes. Because it does happen. I've been sent pictures from people that lived in nations that didn't have the sanitation quality that we have in the US and in the EU. And there was mold growing inside those cracks. Literally, you took that crazing pattern and it was just mold or I don't know, some sort of bacteria. I'm not a biologist, growing through it. And it was disturbing, but at the same time, they didn't have that modern sanitation standard. But in this study, they basically found that if you wash your pots thoroughly, dishwasher, very fairly tough soaps, that it will clear off any of that bacteria. But theoretically, it can grow in the crazes because they are cracks. They're literal cracks in the glaze. But it's not necessarily a threat if everything is kept clean.
So the answer to Jessica's question is that she should not worry because the materials that we are using are not typically within a ceramic glaze are not going to hurt us.
No. If you have lead, or the other material I didn't mention was cadmium, lead and cadmium are actually the only materials that are regulated in the US and in the EU. So if you don't have lead and cadmium, you can call your work food safe. Now, there are other standards that we believe that you should hold to about making durable glazes, and that's a longer conversation. But at the end of the day, if you want to call something food safe, if you don't have lead or cadmium, it's food safe. And that's the end of the literal definition of food safety.
Boom. Okay. Rose and Matt, let's take another question.
Hi, for Flux sake, this is Liam from Belgium, and I have a question for you. Is waiting for my kiln to cool all the way down to room temperature going to keep my work from crazing?
Ah, that is a good one. I am truly impatient and hate waiting.
So is Matt. Matt is very impatient.
We have a museum of burned.
Many kiln gloves that have burn holes in them.
It seems like a perfectly good idea to just wrap it up in KOL. Yeah.
My questions were burning. I had to get into the kiln and have my questions answered.
Yes, because you're impatient. So Lynn, to answer your question, no, if you wait for your kiln to go down to room temperature, it's not going to help your crazing. Unfortunately, that is based in your chemistry for the glaze.
Crazing, of course, is one of those things that's going to drive everybody crazy because it seems like it can pop up randomly, that it can be affected by how you cool the kiln or open the kiln. But in reality, crazing relies on a very specific behavior in all of our materials, which is called thermal expansion. Okay, so thermal expansion is a property that affects all materials. It's not just ceramics, but it affects plastics, it affects metals. Everything expands and contracts as you heat it and cool it. The problem with glazes, actually, it's not just a glaze problem, is a glaze and clay body problem because clay bodies have their own thermal expansion and glazes have their own thermal expansion, and they're different. Okay. And the problem is If a clay body's thermal expansion is too different from a glaze's thermal expansion, it'll create stress. And the stress creates a crack that we see as crazing. And that's going to change on a lot of variables. And that's one of the weirdest. One thing that some people may have noticed is that they'll have a glaze that works super great on like their stoneware body, but then on a white body, it'll craze like mad. And that's because those two different clay bodies have different thermal expansions themselves. So each clay body has a different thermal expansion, and vice versa. You can have glazes that will have different thermal expansions. So, your clear glaze might craze on your white body, but your green glaze doesn't, because those glazes have different thermal expansion. And so whenever you have the difference, it's going to become a problem. But it does lead to this huge psychological issue with opening your kiln, because a lot of people are instructed, you can't open your kiln until it's back down to room temperature, as Lynn is saying, because it'll stop the crazing. But it won't. Actually, crazing is going to happen no matter what, because it's a chemistry problem and not a cooling problem. The only difference that you get, the benefit that you get from not opening your kiln until it's at room temperature, is that you don't have to listen to the crazing happening, which makes you feel better.
It is painful. Yeah.
It is. It's like hearing a baby cry, because like you open up that kiln and it's like ping, 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 ping. And it'll make you feel like sad and like, oh my gosh, if I close the kiln, you won't do it. Well, you're just hiding the problem, right? You're just putting it away.
I thought that pinging sound meant it was done.
It's like a pop-up turkey timer.
Yeah, like the turkey popper.
Those never work. Those are not accurate for temperatures. Don't use a turkey thermometer for crazing.
That's why they have 1-800 lines for turkeys. So Matt, that kind of brings us back to Jessica's question earlier. So if I open up my kiln and everything, let's say I've got mugs and everything's crazed inside, do I want to sell those?
That is a great question. And it's one sort of going back to sort of regulations and what you can do. You can sell them. There's nothing stopping you from selling them. And, there's the chance that bacteria will grow in them. The real issue is that crazing makes your work much, much weaker physically. So it's much more likely to crack and break, because those crazes are cracks that actually go straight down to the clay body. And that creates what we call a critical failure location. And it's a weak spot. And that weak spot, if you knock it against another mug or, your countertop or anything, that can be the place where the crack just starts and whoosh goes and just cracks that pot in half. So it's not a great idea to sell crazed ware, but people do it.
They do it all the time. Historical pottery has crazing all the time.
So you've really just got to be informed, make your best decision.
Yeah, it is a personal choice, and that goes back to the whole conversation about, safety and all of those things. It's always going to be the user's discretion. Now, what you can do is be more informed. The same with sort of what's toxic. We work sometimes with a toxicologist friend, and she taught us the toxicologist credo, which is the dose makes the poison. And the same thing applies in ceramics, that it depends on how you use it. So is your chemistry good? Is your firing complete? Does your clay body and your glaze match? And that is that thing.
And knowing your materials, what materials you are adding to your glazes. So
yeah. One thing that we always talk about with our students is that, making ceramics, even though you might have gotten into it for the art, is an act of chemistry. There's no denying it. It is chemistry. Sometimes we don't like to confront that chemistry, and sometimes we'd rather turn our eye and not admit to our high school chemistry teachers that, oh my gosh, I'm learning chemistry now, and then they look at you and go, I knew it would come back to you. But it is chemistry. So learning things like thermal expansion and what materials help and what materials don't, is a huge benefit for making that work.
I'll accept your chemistry argument. The algebra, I'm still on the fence about. But, well, Rose and Matt, what do you think? Should we take another call?
Absolutely.
Hi, for Flux sake. This is Jim from the Bay Area, and I have a question. Sometimes, when I try a glaze recipe I find in a book, a magazine, or on the internet, they never look the same as they do in the picture. Am I doing something wrong, or is it like those church cookbooks where the little old ladies always change the recipe just a little so no one else's Jell-O salad would be as delicious as theirs is?
I love this
Perfect.
question.
I love that one. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Does that make you the little old church lady, Matt?
I never leave anything out. I always disclose everything.
That is such a great question. I mean, that is such a popular ceramic myth, perhaps. I don't know. We'll find out from you two, that people are changing their secret recipes so that no one can possibly make their blue chun.
Well, I think, the pictures that you see online or in books or magazines are the most perfect glaze that they have. They don't show you all the other iterations they have before that. So they're going to take their best one. And I would totally do this too. I'm going to take my best one and show it off to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have secrets, but it's also their most perfect test style that they have or perfect pot of that glaze that they've ever seen that they're showing off to the world.
You mean glaze test failures don't sell magazines?
Yeah, no, they should just come to our studio and see all the failures that we have.
We definitely fail more than anybody. It's a lot of garbage.
Yes, and we keep them all too, I should
keep it
say.
all.
So it's like historically it's amazing. But yes, it's a whole studio of failure.
I always say that it's best to learn through failure and to have things that don't work because it does tell you what not to do in the future. So, but for Jim's question, it is a great frustration that a lot of people are out there and they're trying all these recipes that you see on online or in the publications, but there's a lot of variables that you're not considering. Yeah, no, the first is people are going to show their success, like Rose is saying. The other thing is, like in books, they're showing pots. They got studio lighting. They got all sorts of things. One time a friend of mine was at a craft show and a friend of hers bought a pot that in a booth that looked all sparkly and amazing, and then she left the booth and all of a sudden it looked boring, and she was like, "But what happened? It looked so great." And it was because they lit the booth and they had lighting inside that booth that made that particular glaze sort of sparkle and shimmer. And so there's a lot of those types of tricks, but there are a couple of variables that we need to be aware of. No, I don't think that anybody's changing their secret ingredient. I mean, they certainly could, but it's, in my experience, it's never been that way. People generally share, but we need to look at a bunch of the variables that we don't consider when we're looking at a clay body.
Yeah, because there are a lot of variables when it comes to ceramics. You have your clay body, you have your glaze, you have your firing temperature, you have your materials. There are a ton of variables.
Water content, bisque temperature, all of these are super relevant because one of the things to know is that aside from the chemistry and the materials, something like how you apply your glaze is going to be a big deal. And people often think, oh, brushing versus dipping. That's not even the thing. How much water is in your glaze is absolutely going to affect the thickness of your application. We've done plenty of tests where we make a glaze where you make it with 50% water and it looks one way, and you make the same glaze with 100% water and it looks completely different, because you're getting less glaze when you do double the water. And this particular glaze needs to be a particular thickness. And so you do have to build working relationships with your glazes to get them to work like that.
Well, that's all fine and good. But let's say I just spent a bunch of money on a bunch of clay or ceramic glaze books. So how am I supposed to live my best ceramic life if I can't trust this?
Well, it's all about experimentation and figuring out how it works in your studio.
That sounds like work, Rose.
It is work.
That's the real answer. Yeah, the first and foremost thing is The materials aren't the mystery that you think they are. We teach people all over the world. I've made glazes with people on every continent except Antarctica, and the glazes all work the same. Okay, chemistry is chemistry the world around, but what changes is how you work with the glaze. So yeah, what Rose is saying, the first thing is experiment with thickness. Okay, again, we assume that all clay bodies are going to be the same. It's not. Some glazes are fine with variations in thickness. Some of them have to be particularly thick. Some of them have to be particularly thin. Honestly, the first test that you do with a new glaze should be like, make 4 or 5 test tiles and make one with a 1-second dip, make one with a 2-second dip, make one with a 4-second dip, make one with an 8-second dip, and to see how it varies when they're getting thicker or when they're thinner. Not just trying it, because a lot of people, they make their test tiles and they're like, oh, well, this is my dark clay body and this is my dark clay body with slip. That's not even relevant. Literally just how thick it should be. The other thing that we really advocate is water. I really think that everyone should start including the amount of water they put in their glaze like it's an ingredient. Because like I said, most glazes are different. If you put in 50% water, if you've got 100 grams of glaze, put in 50 grams of water, and they'll be very different with 100 grams of glaze and 100 grams of water. And you should be weighing and tracking your water. It should be treated as an ingredient because thickness is going to be one of those big ones. Now, yeah, there's other stuff like what clay body you're using. Bisque temperature is huge. We also have to take bisque temperature as, oh, whatever, I'm just bisquing. No, you're going to get a very different application on one clay body on a cone 04 bisque versus a cone 08 bisque.
Yeah, and it's about consistency, having that consistency run through your studio.
Yeah.
Bisquing and paying attention to how things are the same or different, and that's your variable. If you have different bisque temperatures, it's a variable, and you're just throwing in more information than you need.
Yeah, coming from a community studio, that comes up a lot in that everyone just assumes that every bisque is the same temperature, though they'll put, say, individual cone packs into a glaze kiln, but not their bisque. And so what you're saying is it's really as important to know your bisque temperature as your glaze temperature.
And it changes for clay body to clay body. Here's the crazy thing. From clay body to clay body, you're going to get different bisque results. And so what's really important, as Rose says, is to do it the same. Okay, we sort of treat like, oh yeah, you put the cone packs in your glaze firing, as you say, Kathy, but not in your low temperature. Low temperature is really, really important. Okay, that to make sure things are consistent. Now you'll find people talking about, oh, bisque to this temperature, bisque to that temperature. We don't even care about that. We care about it being consistent, because if you bisque to cone 08 one day and bisque to cone 04 the next, you're going to have very different absorption, and that's going to cause a problem. And actually, we can post a picture of different bisque temperatures on one glaze on our blog. So we'll post a picture of that for everybody to see how bisque temperature can affect a glaze.
Excellent. So overall, we don't want to believe everything that we see in magazines and books, but instead we want to get into our studios and do the work to test them and pay attention to both our bisque and glaze firings.
Yeah, we assume that the glaze test applies to everybody else, but we have to make it in our studio and put in the work. That's the hard part, but we have to do it.
I'd like to thank Rose, Kathy, and Matt for doing the interview. It was a blast to talk to them, and I think you're really going to enjoy their show. You can subscribe on any of your favorite podcast apps and find out more information by going to the website. That's brickyardnetwork.org/for Flux sake. At that website, you can also find out about all of the podcasts that are on the network, and it's been great to see the downloads coming in as people are starting to listen to all the new shows. So thanks to everyone that's getting involved, and if you would like to support the Brickyard Network by becoming a sponsor, feel free to send in an email through the contact page at brickyardnetwork.org. Before we go, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, the Michiana Pottery Tour. They are hosting their 10th annual tour September the 25th and 26th in northern Indiana and southern Michigan. Some of the 30 potters will be in person for the tour, and then others will be selling online through their web stores. You can find out more information about that at michianapotterytour.com. You can also follow them on Instagram at Michiana Pottery Tour. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.